until we can sign.
All right. Welcome to all of you. Most of you I recognize as having been here before. I welcome those of you who are here for the first time. If you were not here for the last session, or if you missed any of them, the first 10 weeks are over here. Okay, the sheets for them. So if you have to pick up a couple of them, if you missed them, they are there. I don't know that I'll bring them down every week, but they're certainly here for today. And I'm Tom Trapp. I taught at Concordia for 30 years. I've been pastor here. I'm in my 12th year, one form or another. And had a chance always in Bible classes to be able to talk about the scriptures as well as in my Concordia classes. And this is kind of like one last round without having to grade papers. That's the most important operant term about the whole thing, is that I don't have to grade papers. I just wanted to find out if the mic was on. Is it projecting a little bit? Okay. Housekeeping things first of all. After the break, I want everybody to kind of reintroduce themselves. All right, so we can once again get to know people. We didn't really do that until toward the end last time, and so I would like to take care of that. Janelle is celebrating her birthday today. She tells me she's old enough to both drive and drink. So I don't know why they just brought a cake instead of a keg or something like that. But anyway, we will forgive her for that. The plan for this is that we will do 10 weeks in the fall and 10 weeks in the spring for 5 years. So the Bible, what I've broken it down to, originally I was going to do 80 sessions. I've decided I need to do the 90 instead of 80 because there's just too much in what's called the writings to do those all at once. And so we'll do 4.5 years on the Bible, and the last 10 weeks we'll do on church history. I have an overview, a summary that I did way back in 1976 when we were celebrating the 200th anniversary of our country. I took one of the versions of Kenneth Scott Lutteret's History of the Church and typed out notes and used that for about a half a year in the congregation I served in Michigan. And so we will have that, and I've got PowerPoint slides all the way through to the present day, so I've got most of that done. I don't have all the New Testament slides done, and there's 1 or 2 parts of the Old Testament and Chronicles that I still have to do. Other than that, I don't have PowerPoint slides on either Proverbs or the Psalms. Proverbs are just almost impossible to try and do those for, and I just haven't taken the time to do it on the Psalms, and I'm not sure how easier or helpful that would be. In terms of your participation,
It's recording.
pardon? What? Ask a question.
Oh, it doesn't show anything, is it?
She
It
thinks that's a
will.
projector.
It will when I get there.
Okay, that's what it was.
It will when I get there.
Okay.
It'd probably be a good idea to open it up.
We gotta have them special glasses on, don't we?
Okay, yeah. Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you reminded me. I would have probably forgotten. So, a couple of things. There is a little basket at the door. I am not charging for this, but I would ask that from time to time you might kick in a little for the coffee and for the printing. And Maria kind of keeps track of what the costs of the printing are, and I make sure that I give her sufficient funds so that it's really not taking money out of the congregational budget for that, and then take care of the coffee and such. And it broke about even last time, so I expect if you do the same, we'll do the same. Then the one thing that I do ask, and I have a little yellow card that Maria put together, I would ask that you are not demanded to do it or anything. I'm not going to check on you, but I would like to have support for a Central Lutheran School each time we do this, and so for each 10-week session I would encourage you to send the $25 donation, or give it to me if you want to, and I'll get it over there to CLS as we continue to support our ministry there. So if you are able to do that, I would appreciate that very much. The sheets will be down here each week. Today is the only time we'll have the hello kind of name tag. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to send, starting in the front, this is more of a kind of a registration for the whole 10 weeks, just so we have phone numbers and emails that we can be in touch with you. And so name, address, phone, and email, and put a separate line for each person. So if it's husband and wife, at least put a separate line for the names for each of you. And I'll just send that around right now, write it, and then send it that way and wander its way all the way back to the back of the room. Then Harriet Marks asked me last fall to maybe have a way in which we could plan to have treats each time, so that we don't have everybody bringing them one week and nobody bringing them the next. So this is a Living with God 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock treat sign up. So the Markses, Roxanne and Harriet did that this time, and so I would hope that maybe we only do it once each, or at most that some people might do it a second time, but that way we should be able to take care of that. So I will send that one around as well, and you can either buy something or make something as your little heart desires. Then, any other things, let's see, so that I will make only decaf coffee. If some of you want regular coffee, I would just ask you to bring it along. Most people didn't want regular coffee at this time of the day, and I don't want to be throwing a whole lot out. And so I hope that that's convenient for you. I did not put water out today, I just remembered. And so there is some water in the refrigerator, and at the break, if not beforehand, if you want some water, it should be marked in the fridge, and just go get that and put that out. I just remembered that right now. So we did the first 10 weeks on the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so now it is time to look at what we call the former prophets. One of you asked me already, are we going to skip Ruth? Well, what do you think? Are we going to skip Ruth?
No.
We're just not going to do it now. Okay? And the reason for that is I'm going, by and large, by the order that you can send it down here first. Send it down. Run them the same way so we get by everybody, if you would, please. In the Hebrew Bible, there are 3 parts to the scriptures. The Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses. Then the second part, the prophets. And the third part, the writings. Now, the Jewish community does not have a New Testament, right?
Right.
And so they would not call the part we're studying now the Old Testament. For them that's, and I've heard it pronounced both ways, Tanakh or Tanakh. T-N-K. T is for Torah in Hebrew. N is for Nevi'im, which is the word, Navi is the word for a prophet. And Ketuvim, starting with a K, is the word for the writings, from Katav, to write. And so we talk about the Torah and the prophets and the writings. They would talk about the Tanakh. And that's where you would find on Hebrew Bibles, you'll have a Tav and a Nun and a final Kaf on there to represent those 3 parts with just a little A in between each one of them. And so in the prophets go like this. Not like that. I have a throat that does not like me, and I've been to the doctor about it. He said, well, you'll get over it. He said, just keep your throat warm. And so I'm trying to keep my throat warm. But anyway, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, that's what Jewish people would look at for the instruction in the faith. Jewish people would talk about having found 618 instructions, and we won't go back through all of that now. The prophets, we would divide into 2 parts, the former prophets and the latter prophets. Now the former prophets are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. The latter prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the book of the 12, which is Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. The latter prophets will form both next fall and next spring.
What happened that made one former, the other one latter?
The former prophets are not writing prophets. So you'll talk about somebody like Samuel as a prophet, and there are other ones that will come along, but they don't have books that record what they spoke. It'll talk about things that they did, but we will not have long speeches like we will in Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or the others. Okay, and it comes from an earlier time period. This covers the time period from about maybe 1250 BC. These will go all the way to even past 586 before Christ. So what we're going to look at this spring is the story of the Israelite people, the Hebrew people, in the land from the time they come in until the last of them are taken away into exile. Okay. Now, in the writing prophets, then Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the book of the 12, those will all fit into that story. And they will be preaching primarily about what's going to happen as the Lord comes in and removes the people because of their unbelief. Then we get to the writings. Okay? The writings are going to include things such as Psalms, Job, Proverbs. We're going to get what's called the Megillot. Megillah Galal means to roll something. And so there are 5 scrolls or 5 books that are put together. And I will not get the order right. I always have to go and check it again. But they are really kind of for festivals. And so we will have the Song of Solomon in there. We will have Ruth in there. We will have Esther in there. We will have Lamentations in there. And we will have the song of what did I miss? Esther, Job, no, there are 5. Ecclesiastes, or Song of Solomon. I don't think I mentioned that. Did I? Okay, Song of Solomon, Job, Ruth, Esther, Lamentations, and goodness gracious.
There's a lot to it, isn't it?
Ecclesiastes, thank you. Then in addition to that, there will be, which is why I decided to spread it out for a whole extra year, because I didn't think I could do all of that, and then books like Daniel, okay, and First and Second Chronicles, which will be in some ways a replay of this, and there are some other things as well that will come in there. So some of those of that Megillot, that'll come next spring, and or that next spring after that yet. So we really need 3 years on the Old Testament. We're going to take 1.5 years then on the New Testament. So I don't remember exactly how I have this broken down. My guess is that we will first do the 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then we will, I don't know if I think I might have Acts in there as well. And then Paul's letters, and then John and 1st and 2nd and 3rd John and Revelation and Jude and the general epistles will be quite a ways out. So that'll be the last fall that we will do, and then the last spring will be the time for the church history. So there's a chance to nibble away at a little bit. We'll get into some of the Reformation that last time around as well. So there's plenty to do yet, but some people I talked to a pastor the other day and said, how can you be going through that so fast? To do 5 books of Moses in 10 weeks. Well, we could take longer. But this is kind of an overview to give you a framework of what's going on, and so it's the best I can think of for being able to cover a little bit of everything, and we can certainly go back and pick some stuff up and say, remember here, and now this is where this unfolds. So anyway, that's kind of the overall framework for the entire project, and so we're in week 11 of 100 weeks. Okay, yes?
Is Ezra and the Jewish
Ezra and Nehemiah will be in along with Daniel and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Actually, the last book in the Hebrew Bible is 2nd Chronicles. So, yes, Ezra and Nehemiah are in there as well. Yep. And I decided I don't have to run that fast with it to get it done in 4 years, and so, anyway, so it is. So, I don't know how many people I heard talking at their tables as I came in about all the killing.
Yeah.
All the killing that you were reading about. It wasn't just one of you. I probably heard it 6 or 7 times as I walked in the door. So you have to deal with that a little bit. Okay, that's part of what you have to deal with. Now here's the question. I probably covered this with some of you before, but let's think this through once again. How do we look at what the Bible is? What do we do with it? So if I were to buy a cookbook, what would it be for? A present. If I bought a cookbook, it would be for a present that I would give to someone who knows how to cook. It would not be for me. You might buy a cookbook because you are interested in souffles or whatever the case may be. You may look because of your interest. It could be the same book. Depending on what you want to do with it, it'll have a different purpose. And the strange thing is that we have all sorts of ideas about what's in the Bible and what we're supposed to do with it. And depending on what we think we're supposed to do with it, that will help us decide how do we read it. Okay? So the questions we address are going to result in different ways of answers. Now, if you want the Bible to be a nice, moral little storybook to talk to children about how to play nice with their friends and obey their mommy and daddy, there are many parts of this book that you will not let them see. And if you look in children's Bibles, there will be big gaps at places. And the flood, for example, instead of God's wrath against all of humanity except for 8, turns into a nice little story about the arky and all the nice animals going in 2 by 2. We have a grand old time singing the grand old songs about it and ignore the rest of it. So if you think there was a lot of dying and killing in Joshua, let's think about the flood. If you think there's a lot of killing here, let's think about Sodom and Gomorrah, where God carried out his wrath against some people at the southern end of the Dead Sea. Now, you see, our problem is we come up with what we think a picture of God is. We decide what God ought to look like, and then we vote on whether something in the Bible fits that picture or not. That's why a lot of people are not Christian. Because they think God should be nice and loving and affirming and accepting and cutting slack all over the place and just be nice to me. Never have any faults found in me. And so if that's the way I read the Bible, these are not going to be easy books to read. I have asked this before, but to try to get at the framework, first of all, one of the questions, there are many questions and directions we can go with this, but is the Bible a blueprint or a roadmap or a set of operating instructions? Is the Bible a blueprint or a roadmap or a set of operating instructions? You have to choose one. Operating instructions, I have somebody. Anybody for the
I'm gonna say roadmap.
roadmap? Okay,
I concur with the roadmap.
you concur with the roadmap.
Yeah.
Okay?
Blueprint.
Okay, blueprint. Okay, now we have all 3 of them out on the table.
Or could it be all the above?
I don't think so.
None of the above.
What if you want all of the above?
Yeah.
Then somebody's buying it for a present, somebody is buying it to learn how to cook, and somebody's learning it to get really skilled in a particular area.
Okay.
Okay? So, I mean, you can come at the Bible with any of these. But if we want to try to say, how can we read this and listen to what God is saying about himself and his people, then it's going to have a little different direction than it might if we were simply trying to find our way to God. So, do we need to find our way to God? Huh? We can't. Well, there are an awful lot of people walking this planet who think they can. So if they think they can find their way to God, they're going to read these scriptures like any other scriptures and find out, does this help me get to God? Which one would that be?
Roadmap.
The roadmap.
Roadmap.
How do you get your way to God? And the usual way that people would come up with is find out what He wants me to do, and if I do it, then He will reward me. Every Sunday, people hear sermons about that. If you want God to bless you, then you need to do what He expects of you, what He calls you to do, what He wants you to do. It's going to concentrate on your behavior. And it's going to say, you want to get over there? Here's the way you get there. Now, any of you have a GPS of some sort in your car? Okay. I have OnStar.
Yeah.
And do you know one of the things that OnStar says to me regularly? You have left the planned route.
Yeah.
You have left the planned route. I told you to go north on Aldine and turn right on Hubbard. You went south on Aldine. And then it says, oh, turn at Englewood. And I keep going straight. It says, okay, turn at Minnehaha. And then I turn. Sometimes it says, when you get back on the route, then I'll talk to you some more. Do you need an updated route? I might say yes, I might say no. I might be just pulling off to get gas, and then I know I'm going to get back on the road. It knows where I am. If I'm from here to over there at the wall, it knows if I've left the road. All right? Now, let's understand, there are people who will use every one of the approaches I talk about. Now, what's a blueprint? What's a blueprint do?
It's a design.
Okay, it is a design that then someone has to follow. So it's something like a roadmap, but it says before you even get the roadmap, you have to build the bridge. And so this would be, how do you build a bridge to God? Even more, here's what God tells you to do. You've got, in the Old Testament, you've got 613 laws and rules. And they were intended to tell people how to get to God, right?
No.
Not really. Not at all. Because when do they come? After God says, I chose you. I am already with you. I am guiding and leading you. And along the road, this is the way to live in the community that I'm establishing for you. It's nothing about how to get there. Why can't it? Because they were
Already there.
already there. Now, in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy, they weren't already there. As of Joshua 1, they're there. And they're going into the land. Deuteronomy said, when you get into the land, here's what God is giving you, and here is how you are to live in a relationship with one another and take care of the good land that He has given you. That, I understand to be operating instructions. It says the gizmo is already built. You're not going anywhere. I doubt that you have found any place in the Old Testament where it says, here's how you get to heaven. Right? Where was heaven? Closest you are going to get is the land of Canaan. We're not talking about when you die you're going to go to be with Jesus. That's just not there. What this is, the land of Canaan, is outside the garden, a place where God says, I will protect you from those around you. And so, if we want to push it, then we can say, yes, but how they got in there and what they did was really horrible and mean and nasty and rotten, to go kill, and the next word is going to be innocent people. To go kill innocent people.
But are they?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah.
That's the question. Are they innocent? And where does God get off with being able to hurt people? Does He have a right to do that? Now you see, as soon as I start judging God, I'm already deciding what kind of Bible do I have. And I'm here to tell you that many, many commentaries on these books of the Bible are written by people who shudder. And they say this is awful, and this is horrendous, And we certainly want to ignore this as giving us any guidance in our Christian life. Well, the question for me is this here to give us guidance in our Christian life? Is the purpose of this to abstract rules and principles for how to live our life? And if we want to abstract them, what do we want out of it? Do we want to get into some Garden of Eden? Do we want to get into some promised land that we're not in now and we're trying to figure out how to get there? For us as Christians, the problem is it's too late. We are already in an eternal relationship with God. For Israel, it was not, how do we take the land? But here's what God says to go take the land. He even lays all of that out. Now, the trouble is, we don't know all of the details of what was going on in the land of Canaan. We do have a comment way back in Genesis that says that God told Jacob, you go down into the land of Egypt and I will protect you and I will bring you back when you become a large people. Because the sin of Canaan has not yet been fulfilled. In other words, it's God's version of 3 strikes and you're out. And it's going to be 400 years, roughly, before they are going to come back. But just as God at some point said, I am going to remove all the people on the earth except those 8, because they are all wicked against me, and then that he is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, what does he use for the flood? Water. Okay, a natural thing where he comes and he destroys virtually everybody except those in the ark. With Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim, what does he use? Huh? The Taliban. No, the fire and brimstone bomb. Yes, uses fire and brimstone and destroys all of them in that city. I think my job as a student of the Scriptures is to try to be as favorable toward understanding the story from God's side. Now, he may be sending us a message about this is what happens when you leave the relationship. Okay? And yeah, I think he is. But if he's trying to give us a message about how to stay in the relationship and how to be good little boys and girls, I'm not sure that there is anything direct and specific, but more the general thing about here's the relationship that already exists. Don't leave it. You're married to me. Don't cheat on me, which is exactly what they're going to do. And so the whole story is going to be about how those who come in and are gifted with the land will finally lose it because they turn away. That's by the end of 2 Kings. This is not a fun story. But I'm here to say that I believe all the way through it, God was being faithful to his promises. He was loving his people. He was protecting them inside that relationship from all of those who could bring harm to them. And he was acting as he had said he would. Some people stay faithful. Many people bail out on God. And so this is the story about the depth of the human heart leaving the relationship. It's nothing about the little things within it. It's where the entire relationship gets in trouble. Yes?
Sometimes I think the reason people have a tough time with God having all the people in Canaan killed or whatever is that, in the 10 Commandments it says you should love your neighbor. And
Okay.
we've had that pounded in our heads since, when. And then all of a sudden you've got a God that's killing people. You have a tough time separating them two.
Yep.
Even after you say it's for this reason he did that, I can accept that. But this other thing has been pounded into us for so long that we're supposed to be Minnesota nice.
Let's look at the, do we have any prisons in Minnesota?
Any what?
Prisons.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Because we've got some bad people.
Yeah, but aren't we supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves? And
Yeah,
just
we
keep
put 'em
giving
away.
them another chance, another chance, another chance, another chance?
You always gotta turn it around, don't you?
Huh? Doesn't it just irritate the heck out of you?
Yes. I know I should have said anything.
No, it's a great question, because what happens is there is a point at which God says, I am not going to allow all of those people to keep on hurting each other. They have been wicked and hateful toward each other, and the age of the great Canaanite cities is the late Bronze Age in this whole region. Really big cities, really big walls in the cities. You don't build a city with, in one case, a 40-foot thick wall unless somebody's trying to get what you've got. Okay? These are not everybody under his vine and under his fig tree. There are people groups here who are at each other and are killing each other, and you find evidence of cities being destroyed long before the Israelites got there. And so there was a lot of war there. I would liken it to, we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, but if some parents are being abusive to their children, we take the children out of the situation. And so if I concentrate on this bad person, how God is treating that person, I miss the point. Because what God is saying is, here's the person who is being harmed and no one is stepping in. And at some point, I'm going to step in. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to let you do this forever. Okay? I'm not going to let you keep on harming others and drawing them away and making them into your slaves or your servants. Now, the strange thing is that God will use the people of Israel as his method of getting rid of the people in the land. Now, the Yahweh Sebaoth, the Lord God of armies, says, I will go in, and before you ever get to the land, I will be like a hornet. And I will get the people so scared that they will run away. For those who are tough enough, in other words, he in essence gives them a chance at least to run away. But we read this in light of what we see with the Taliban and ISIS and all of the other Boko Haram and all of these that we read about that none of us ever heard of a short time ago in our life, but we did hear about other people. The United States went into Europe to stop Hitler. They said, we're going to stop this. God uses his people to stop that. But it's not laid out in so much detail that we hear about all of the things that they did. And so we say, just like many people will say about God and Pharaoh, God hardened the heart of this wonderful man. No, Pharaoh said, I'm in charge here. God finally says, the more I say I'm going to be in charge here and let my people go, the more he's going to get resistant and resistant and resistant. So at some point, I'm going to have to just say, here's how I'm in charge. And then the firstborn died. But God he gave him 10 signs and said, realize something special is going on, let these people go. And Pharaoh keeps saying no. So we want God to be nice and gentle to everybody. But we also have our prisons. We also know there is a limit to it. And we do know about child abuse. And I don't know how many weeks go by, I don't think many, before you read again about some boyfriend who's watching somebody's child because that woman has to be at work, who abuses the child, and the child is either badly injured or dies. And with all of that going on, well, what do? We remove that person when we can from any caregiving. And so we tend, I am trying to be as favorable toward what I read in the scriptures of God saying, this is who I am, and looking at the whole story. My own fallen sinful nature is going to say, I still think that was pretty bad. Right? I'm never going to get away from that. But we also see this as a little hint about what happens to all of us eternally if God deals with us according to our sins. That's called hell. And he says, if I didn't interrupt it with my sons dying and rising, and Jesus and Joshua are the same name, Yeshua, if I didn't do it with my sons dying instead of all of you, and put him to death with all of your sins on it, you would all be lost too. You would all be like the Canaanites. eternally. Now we can get all the questions about, well, didn't God want them to be saved, and shouldn't He have sent evangelists in beforehand? I cannot answer that question. I know what God did for us, but I do not claim to know that I could go into the inner reaches of the inner sanctum of what God thinks and does to try to figure Him out. If I want to do that, I will end up an unbeliever. So we have to know at what point we stop and we say, this is who God is and this is what He did. I believe the Bible is God's side of the story. And I don't believe its primary purpose is to help me get to God, but to tell me what it means that He came to me, that He came to all of us. And to minimize God's wrath is to minimize His mercy. He could have destroyed everybody. And very often His wrath comes after hundreds of years. But we don't see all that. And I must say, my viewpoint in the Christian church today would probably be a minority one. Because there are many, many people involved in theology whose basic purpose is to milk the Bible for how we are to be nice people on this earth and get along with each other.
Absolutely.
And I do not think that's a bad thing. But if we are judged by whether we are good enough, then give me $100 for every time you've driven by somebody at a red light with a cardboard sign. Okay? Love your neighbor as yourself. We don't hand out $100 every time we go by one of them. You know, I don't have $100,000 in my glove box waiting to hand that out. And so we make our decisions. And so if we say, well, be perfect, are you really being perfect about loving your neighbor as yourself, or is it just a nice, neat phrase for the neighbors you like? Okay, now that's all of us. Okay, you don't get the special role of being the only bad one in the crowd. We all do that. We all justify why we do what we do and why we don't do what we don't do. Well, you can't help everybody, and well, I'm already helping somebody over here, and we'll come up with all of our answers. The only one I know who did something for everybody is Jesus. And what He did was He hung on the cross to say, all of you are guilty. And so we are guilty before Him as well. And yet He does not act toward us on the basis of our guilt or our self-centeredness. And so all we have to do is stand before Him and say, well, I've been working my best at loving my neighbor as myself. And He'll say something like, well, name your neighbors down the whole street. And I can get to the fourth house and then I'm in trouble. Okay? And well, aren't you supposed to love all your neighbors? Do all your neighbors mean just on your street, or on the side street, or on the street behind you, or across the street, or the whole neighbor? You know, when do you finally get there that you've really done it? And so we con ourselves into thinking, well, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. No, we're not. We might justify, well, we do this and we do that. But there's always somebody who's going to say, yes, but. And they're going to make the pile bigger and bigger and bigger until finally we are supposed to love every human being on the planet as much as we love ourselves. And only one to do that was Jesus. So we're saved by grace. And the problem here is that the Israelites are going to go into the land and they're going to fall in love with the people who live there. See, they don't want to kill them either because they've got some real neat things they figured out about how to live in that community, in that climate. And so they're going to become their friends. And they're going to then be drawn away into their wickedness and their evil desires. And so the root sin is I will play God, and if what God says doesn't quite matter or mean enough to me, I'll do my own thing. Okay, kind of like when we're growing up and our parents tell us, you know, this is the smart way to do it. I like the phrase in Tom Sawyer. He ran away from home and came back and was amazed how much his father had learned while he was gone. And so instead of saying, how do I make sense of this, horrendous as it seems to me, and you know, you don't have to go very far. There are a lot of people who say, I'm not going to believe in a God who killed his kid. You don't have to go any farther than that to be able to find out that we play by different rules in our natural, normal, moral way of thinking. But our natural moral way of thinking really is self-centered. Okay? We have it pounded in, but we know exactly where to put the stakes and how far we don't have to go. Right? So just to try to think of this, Joshua and Judges are two books that, for people who believe that everyone should be loving and caring, they just want to skip by these. Okay? So if we want to find out how does the whole book talk the things of God, we have to say, maybe my ideas are the ones that need to be adjusted. And maybe I keep talking to people about things that really don't get at the essence of it. We're not saved because we're good, or we followed all of God's promises or expectations. We're saved because He died to deliver us from God's wrath. So to see God's wrath here simply says, there but for the grace of God go I. And God's grace did come to me, but let's not make God in our own image and likeness. Let's realize He says, I'm not going to let human beings trash this planet forever. Sometimes it has to be through other nations who will stop the wicked ones. The good war was probably no gooder than any other war. It's just that we happened to stop Hitler, but at a terrible, terrible price. 60 million people on the planet died. 60 million. And you know, we can even talk about the Holocaust and the 6 million Jews, which is itself an unbelievable number. But that's only 1/10 of the people who lost their lives in that, those battles, in that war. And so we tend to think we're good people until we say, yes, but lock them up and throw away the key. You know, so we'll all have our limits to who we're willing to care for. And at this point, God is not concentrating as much on the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Hivites and Jebusites and all those. He is concentrating more on, here's the gift I'm giving to my people. How will they respond to it? Will they use the gift, or will they decide that they're going to make their own rules, which is what they will do. So this is, you will know a lot of these Bible stories. There are a lot of the ones, I'm not sure if you hear them in context in Sunday school, because usually it will be, let's be nice to everybody and all of this. But let's not read the next 10 weeks worth of material looking for what God wants us to do. Let's look at it from, here's what God was doing and how the people responded. And so they're the operating instructions. Here's what I'm doing, here's how you work with that. And yes, sir?
Is it not, it's not what God wants us to do, it's what God wants us to be.
No?
No?
God doesn't want anything,
He
He just
doesn't want-
does it.
Well,
He
He's
doesn't.
given, well, He doesn't want,
Okay. If He wants us to do something, we are not doing it now. If He's already equipped us to do something, then He expects we'll live within the framework of it. Okay? And so I might expect my kids to take out the trash. I might expect the sun to come up. One of the two probably will happen more regularly than the other. Okay? But God expects us to be loving and caring and forgiving because He has equipped us to do that.
we have that potential.
No,
No.
we have that actuality. As long as I think I'm not a Christian yet, I'm in trouble. I am a Christian. My new nature is stronger than my old nature because Christ is in me. I got to jump way up to Romans and passages like that to look at that. It's nothing about I'm here and God's over there. He dwells within us. We're baptized into the power of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now they didn't have all of that then. Okay? But they did have God there with them, guiding and leading them through the leaders. But as soon as we talk about God wants me to do it, expects me to do it, anticipates that I will do it, then I'm not doing it yet.
Action, right?
We are already.
We are already, we
We are
are.
already. In fact, look over on the board over there with the 10 Commandments. We went through that. You see the word already underlined over there on the board?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we have to keep hearing that again and again because it's convenient to be a sinner. God shouldn't expect much out of me. I'm just a sinner, you know. And then I don't have to do anything. If I'm equipped for being a saint, and I am one, then there's a whole different ballgame. Then it's, how do I do what He's made me to be? rather than how do I hope that maybe I can achieve to that someday. We're already built to forgive each
Yeah,
other as
yeah.
we have been forgiven, to love each other as we have been loved. And so I would go one better than love your neighbor as yourself. Love one another as I have loved you. I brought you out of eternal death into eternal life. Look at other people through the eyes of the cross. They've been saved too, whether they know it or not. Look out through the empty tomb and the stone rolled away into your eternity and realize God has that in mind for everybody. Look at each other and the sins that others have, put that in a blind spot. I know they did that to me, but I'm not going to keep bringing it up front and center all the time. All right? We already are doing that because we are Christian. Now, the Old Testament people didn't have all that yet. Jesus hadn't died. And so it is still possible for individuals to walk away from the faith. We struggle with that when they do. But Jesus says, I'm never going to leave you nor forsake you. And so there was a lady who talked with me recently who said, well, I believe God sends troubles to us to keep us close to Him. Well, I don't. I don't hear that in the Scriptures. And that people will often say, whom the Lord loves, He chastens and scourges every son He receives. A lot of that is taking away from us the joy of things when we wander. But does God spank me so I'll smile? The only person I know who did that was Nikki Manners. And Dale and I know Nikki. Nikki was in grade school, and Mr. Bussey or Mr. Rickert would take him into the cloakroom and spank him. And that was in the days when you could do that. And the classroom was quieter when Nikki was in the cloakroom than any other time. I mean, if a teacher walks out of the room, kids are always talking. Unless it's Nikki in the cloakroom, you want to hear every whack. And Nikki would come back in with tears running down his eyes, but smiling, acting, he didn't get me. Okay? And that's the way a lot of people will think God is. Well, no matter how much you whack me, I'll just keep smiling, because if I don't, you might whack me more. And so God's the enemy. God's not the enemy. He's our beloved Lord and Savior. He's the bridegroom who says, I'll do everything for you. Nothing is going to hurt your relationship with me. So if somebody out there tries to take us away from the relationship with Him, then He steps in like He would here. So God's not going to protect those I love. But what's going to happen is the people who He protected and brought out of Egypt and brought through the wilderness, the second generation, as they come into the land, He's going to have to say about all of them, you as well could turn away. And the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32 that I did for my doctoral thesis has a whole section in there that says, God anticipates you will turn away. And then most of you will suffer the consequences of that. And when there's only a remnant left without any strength, then God will come in to restore the remnant. Now, that one little section in Deuteronomy 32 is going to cover the whole time of Israel in the land of Canaan on into the time when they get brought back from southern Iraq from Babylon. Okay, and so it's really a kind of a summary of the whole history. But it's not when you say you're sorry and when you repent and when you're better, then I will come to save you. He says, I'll have to come in when there's nothing left for you to do. And so Martin Luther, I've seen this quite often recently, his first of the 95 Theses is our Christian life is a life of repentance. It's continually acknowledging to God, I turned away from you. That's not all we are, but it acknowledges we're saved by grace. And there's nobody here who's going to go into this land who is saved by works. They're saved by grace. Here too, God gives them a chance to get into that land and to be His people and to love and honor and serve Him and love their neighbors as themselves because He was already setting up the framework for it. In other words, it's not if you obey the 10 Commandments here east of the Jordan, then I will let you in. He says, I'm opening the door, I'm letting you in. Now live this out. And they don't. But He's faithful all the way through. It's God's side of the story. Don't blame me for all of what's going wrong, because I'm the one who gave this to you. Don't blame me when something happens, because you're the ones who turned away. And then you get this boomerang. It's built in, it's going to come back upon them. And so, for everybody, sooner or later, God's judgment against their wickedness will come back to get them. Sometimes through floods, sometimes through fire and brimstone, sometimes through his own people here, sometimes through the Assyrians to the northern kingdom in 721, and the Babylonians in the southern kingdom in 586. So God will use the other nations, and then he will say as well, like he does in Isaiah, oh, you Assyrians in northern Iraq, you thought you could come and take everything? When I'm done with them, I'm coming after you. Because you thought you could, with impunity, go and do whatever you wanted. No, nobody's God except me. And I'm going to have my way, and I'm going to protect those whom I love. And that's called the church nowadays. Where's the first church in the Bible? Pentecost.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Anything earlier than that? Where's the first church in the Bible?
Could it be Adam and Eve, because there's more than two gathered?
Yep, she took my class. Adam and Eve. Where does God dwell? That's where the church is. Okay, so it far predates the Christian church. Do you remember it from there?
I don't.
Oh, well,
Sorry.
it got stuck in there anyway. It got stuck in. I don't care if you remember it. It came out, so that's good. Justified my existence for the day. Where God is where the church is. It's within the hearts of the people whom he loves. When somebody says, get out of my heart, I have other things to do, that's called unbelief and rejection of the relationship. So this is going to set out, here's what God gave them, and then it's going to set out, here's what they did with it. Sometimes they were faithful, sometimes they weren't. All right, let's take a 5 or 10 minute break, and then we'll go through the details of Joshua 1 to 24. By the way, Joshua and Judges, I'm having you read larger sections than you will for the other 8. Okay? It's just the way it works out. So. All right, so Alan, if you could put that on pause, please. Okay, now let's see if we can maybe go through. I know I talked about introducing ourselves, but I'm first of all going to talk about a couple of different concepts about what we look at here. Some people would see that the books here, like Joshua, point to God as a warrior. He's the guy who goes into battle to defeat his enemies, just like any other warrior. Some would talk about that this gets into a way of governing, a theocracy, where instead of people like a monarchy with a king or something like that, that God is the one who's in charge. And some people look at this, and because there was an expectation that the gods provided rain and vegetation, that he is simply a vegetation deity, and that you look to him to provide for the rain. We're going to get a lot of this, Alita, with Baal worship and everything like that. It's all going to tie in. And there's more to it than you know now or probably ever want to learn. So here we have, I mentioned the prophets as the former prophets and the latter prophets. The former prophets being Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. You can only have a scroll so long. About 30 feet of a scroll made of vellum, made of animal skin, is about as far as you get. And so this, originally they would have talked about Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, but in the actual scrolls, they had to break it apart after about 30 feet. And so then they had to decide kind of where are we going to break this up. Then we get into Joshua. Here's just the overview of the whole thing, that they cross into the Jordan. Then they're going to go to Jericho and take some of the central hill country. Then they're going to go and defeat some kings in the south who didn't like their alliance. Then there's a little bit about the kings in the north that they will defeat, and then the division of the land, and a few things at the end of that. So when I did these, I have a slide for every single chapter, but I also did an overview of the whole Old Testament out at Woodbury Lutheran a good number of years ago now, where Dean asked me to do 10 weeks to do the whole Bible in, I think, an hour or hour and a half. The whole Old Testament. And I said, I can't do that. He said, yeah, I know you can't do it, but do it anyway. And I had to live then with this. So then I had a Joshua 1 to 5 slide, 6 to 8, and 9 to 10, 11 to 12, 13 to 19, 20 to 24. So you have to go through those, and then you get to the one where there is a slide for each chapter. These are posted online, so as you are reading, you can at least have that open as you're reading and see some of the highlights of what's going to be in each chapter, kind of the outline for it, okay? You don't have to use any of it, but I would provide this for my students so that they would be able to at least have somewhat of a picture. Here's how the story kind of unfolds for what you're going to look at. So I'm not going to read all of the book, of course, but I want to read just a little bit of this at the beginning. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, My servant Moses is dead. Now proceed to cross the Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the Israelites. Notice that I am giving to them, to the Israelites. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, as I promised to Moses, and earlier as I had promised to Abraham.
Abraham.
Okay, it goes all the way back, and so that's how far back you have to go. God said, leave your country, your father's house, and I'll make of you a great nation. From the wilderness and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, to the great sea to the west, shall be your territory. So the great river is up here. Most Mesopotamia means the land between the two rivers. And a lot of people will take the Euphrates on the west and the Tigris on the east, which is really the land of Iraq, and say that's what's talked about. But up here in the north, I won't get an exact mark on it, but the Euphrates River kind of comes this way and then goes back that way. And this is also the land between the two rivers, and so it may be more just up to this section. But here is the Jordanian desert. I don't know what else to do to get this thing to sit still. Every time I change it, it decides to move again. But so it would go, down here is the river of Egypt. That's called the Wadi El Arish. It's not the Nile, but it comes out of the Sinai, and it may be off the page here a little bit, but that goes into the Mediterranean. So kind of here, and you get just a little bit of Eilat down here, which when the agreement was made in the early 80s with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, the land came to about here, and so that's going to be Israel here and then up. So you have, there will be 2.5 tribes that will end up across the Jordan, and the rest of this land will be divided up among the tribes. You will see very nice maps in most of your Bibles about this. This is an actual Landsat photo. Okay, so this is exactly what it looks like at the time when it was taken. Much of the southern end of the Dead Sea is drying up now. There is no point in letting fresh water go into the Dead Sea when people in Jordan and people in Israel need the water. So much of the water, most of the water for Israel is taken out of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, and that they have come up with some very interesting ways of drip irrigation, where they have just the right number of drops of water right on the plant, very little evaporation. In the summertime and springtime, you will have heavy dew, so they will often chase the dogs in the morning around through the plants. And so cucumbers are something with very heavy leaves. It'll shake that water down onto the plant, and then the leaf will be like an umbrella to protect it. So you're watering, that's part of dry farming that they will talk about. But anyway, they at one time in Numbers were going to go up this way. Now they're going to come across, and the Edomites lived down here, the descendants of Esau. They'll go kind of here, they'll come here, and in the land of Moab, the Moabites here, the Amalekites would have been up here. We're going to end up having 2.5 tribes actually settle on the east side of the Jordan, because they will say we have cattle, and this is a good place to have cattle that we have taken from Og and king of Bashan, and there was another king too. But anyway, they defeated 2 of the kings over here. And you've got Amalekites and others who are going to be farther, kind of roaming here and there around in places. But you can see it gets pretty much into the very dry sea at this point, or a very dry desert. So basically today, here's the Gaza Strip. There's going to be an area of the West Bank that is still going to be Palestinian, and the rest of that is going to be Israel here. I don't think much at all there. There'll be a little bit over here that is Israel, and it'll go up to around here. So here's Haifa, and so that will be their major port. Akko, where the Crusaders were, is a little bit farther north of that. Not very good ports along here. Caesarea Caesarea by the sea is in here, and that had been turned into a major port, but that has a lot of that has been destroyed. Those of us who know Karl Volz, that was where Karl carried on archaeological excavations over there. A lot smarter to go to an excavation by the sea than down where Kathy and I were down here in the desert.
Is the Golan Heights in this?
Not by name, but it will be up over here. The Golan Heights will be over in here.
It is the promised land?
It's part of the province. Golan Heights is just one area. It overlooks what was called Lake Hula here, which has been drained now.
Yeah.
But so it's part of the present-day country. But I don't think it's named as the Golan Heights in the Bible.
Oh, no, but is it considered part of the promised land or not?
Well, all of this, from down here all the way up to here, would have been the part of the promised land. What the Israelis have today is not nearly what the promised land was. Okay, there's a lot more that's up here that's not part of their country anymore. That would have been considered part of that. And I figured out once that what is roughly the land of Israel would fit 9 times into Minnesota. What's today on the map known as Israel would fit 9 times into our state. So anyway, the whole point, it starts out and it says that God is giving all of this to them. When you are reading, read story, but also read commentary on the story. Okay, so don't just see that they go up and surround Jericho and walk around it, but watch for these kinds of things, because this will set the stage. Here's what God is doing in the process. So, verse 5, no one shall be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall put this people in possession of the land that I swore to their ancestors to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to act in accordance with all the law that my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, so that you may be successful wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to act in accordance with all that is written in it. It's operating instructions, so figure out how it works. Okay? If it says that your gas tank has 16 gallons, then don't try to make it go 18. Realize that at about 15, you stop at the gas station. Okay? The Bible in many ways is like the operating instructions in your glove box. It says, here's how it was built, here's how it works. And that's real fine for mechanical things. With human things, people say, yeah, but I think I could improve it. I think I could do better here. I've got a different idea, and I want to do my own thing. And God says, in the things that I give you, don't make up your mind about that. That's why it's hard when people say, well, I want a new version of religion. I don't want that old-time religion in the good sense of the word. I want to have everything my way, and I want new church services, I want new songs, I want new liturgies, and I don't like the old way that has no meaning for me anymore. Well, that was also at one time new. And so there were things that people had before that. And it's not to reject that which God moves people to do today. But it's not a question of whether there are ways that we find to help us. It's that as soon as I start thinking that what's pleasing to me is what's most important, instead of what might equip me for service in the kingdom, then already my problem is not about what we do, no matter what it is. My problem is about, I just want to be entertained, or I want to be cared for. I want someone to do things my way. That's what we call growing up, right? I'm tired of my parents telling me what to do. And you get out and you wish they would tell you what to do, because then all of a sudden you're floundering and you don't know. Well, all I want to say with this is, in the deepest realm of our relationship with God, He is not interested in us reforming Him and saying, well, we want a God who will do this. But to try and say, how does that all fit together? How is He really doing that? And so I just want you to think about the fact, as you're reading, the kind of stuff that's setting the stage is often these kinds of things. And so He will tell them what to do then. He talks about the 2.5 tribes that are going to stay on the east side. Excuse me. And so He will also be talking about the fact that the warriors among those 2.5 tribes are to go across the Jordan with them and to help them win the victory over their enemies. God says He will go with them as well. And here's the kicker. Look at verse 16. They answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go, just as we obeyed Moses in all things. That's bad. Because if they obeyed him like they obeyed Moses, we're all in trouble. So we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as He was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your orders and disobeys your words, whatever you command, shall be patted on the back and told, glad to see you have a new idea. Only be strong and courageous. And so God is not saying, how about making up a religion? He's not saying, would you come up with a picture of who I am that you would like? And so I will hear people say, well, my God would never. My God would never. Says, I've got a God I make up. And that God would never do things this way. So, if this happens, either the God who's doing it is a bad God, or somehow failing at least to keep the promises that I expect. You shall not make any graven images. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not take the power of God and use it for your own purposes. We're not in the center. He is. But for the good of all creation. Yes, Dale?
The 2.5 tribes that decided to stay on the other side, were they redoing what God's original plan was?
Were they what?
Were they redoing it so they had a better idea? If they did, how is it that God let them get away with it?
It never is put that way. Sihon was the other guy. Sihon and Agar, the two that they defeat. And so they take over a lot of the possessions there. And so it gives the borders of the land as that wide. Okay, to the desert, the Jordanian desert, so that land is included. Okay? But it's just that they're the ones who will stay, Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh. So they're really not redoing it, because the land included all of that at that point. All right? But there will be people, as we'll see at the end of the book of Joshua, who think that somehow they have turned away to rebel against God. And so they'll sort of make this line on the Jordan River and say, well, if you're on the other side of the Jordan, then you must not be one of us. And they say, yes, we are. We've even put up an altar to remind us we're all part of the same people. But the land, at least, stretches all the way, from the Mediterranean all the way to the Jordanian desert, with the heights that are there, and then from the north by the curve of the Euphrates all the way down to the Wadi el-Arish. We're basically going to look at land where you can live. And the Israelites are going to, by and large, start out as shepherds. And they will live around people like the Philistines, who are by and large farmers. This is right at the beginning of the Iron Age. Okay, and the Philistines are part of the Sea Peoples who brought with them the ability to work with iron. We might think, because of stories like Goliath, that there were a bunch of tall galoots who were pretty stupid. But they actually had a much higher society, much higher level of technology, both in pottery making and in dealing with metals. And they brought those probably from the northeastern part of Turkey, which would have been the Pittsburgh of its day. And who figured out how to do all the processes to get the little flecks of iron out? That's way back in prehistory. but the Iron Age makes it a lot easier to be a farmer, because the plow points don't break like a bronze plow point would. And so all of a sudden, it really is a wonderful advance. And they, the Philistines, actually wanted to go down into Egypt, and the Egyptians pushed them away but said, you can be in southwestern Canaan. So they're coming in about the same time as Israel's coming in from the east, and they will be a problem for them for a good while. So anyway, just that overview chapter of chapter 1, that some of them are going to be able to stay in the other part of the land. Well, now, while they are getting ready to cross, he sends 2 spies. Remember how many spies went up the last time?
There were 12.
There were 12 of them. 2, Caleb and Joshua, who brought back a good report, and the other 10 who brought back a bad report. I think Joshua just says, I'm only going to pick 2 guys who'll bring back a good report, and we're not going to bring back a bad report and be out here for 40 more years. Now that's a guess, but so what happens though, the spies really serve no function. I mean, it's not like they figure everything out, but they're going to go into Jericho, and they are going to go to a prostitute. Again, how could God send these 2 spies to a prostitute? Well, that's part of the world they lived in. You go to a prostitute, now it doesn't say that they slept with her, but she talks like a wonderful believer. She talks like she knows her Sunday school material very well about everything that they did. And so they say, you hang a crimson cord in your window and you and your family will survive. Jericho at this time was probably made with what they call a casemate wall. And that means you had an inner city wall and an outer city wall, and the area between those two, maybe 10 feet, they would have people living in the wall. So they bash through one wall, it's going to be a little harder still to get through the other one. So the wall was not solid. And so that's why they can skitter down the side of the window and go to protect themselves. So they're going to go actually from here. It's going to be swinging on me forever now. Jericho is right up here, just north of the Dead Sea. And so instead of going back across the Jordan to the plains of Moab, they're actually going to go up into the hills here down below Jerusalem and hide for several days, because they would expect they'd go the other way. And so then they go back and they tell the story. But she talks about her faith and that she believes that God is giving them the land. So there are people there. She shows up in Jesus' genealogy, doesn't she?
Yes.
In Matthew 1. She's one along with several other women, all foreign except Mary, who came in. Yeah.
You said that, see if I understood you right, the spies really didn't serve any function. Did you say that?
That's right.
And
I mean,
if they
it's,
did,
if they did, then you would have them say, well, here's the part of the city where it's the weakest. Here's the place to go in, which is what spies usually do.
But how would we know about Rahab if the spies didn't go and stay with her and put that, and
But
she gets saved out of
But
it?
they weren't spying to get a military advantage. Okay, the walls are going to come tumbling down whether they went there or not.
Mhm.
So Rahab is the story,
Yeah.
not their spying. Okay,
Yeah,
so
right.
they didn't bring back a report about how are we going to do the military battle, which is what spies usually do. They try to find out where's the weakest point, where's the strongest point, where do we want to maybe circle around or something. They didn't do that. So the point is, I think, much more, those who bless you I will bless, those who curse you I will curse. So here she blesses them and takes care of them and is thus saved with her family, and later shows up in the genealogy. But the spies don't function as we would expect a spy would. You know,
gathering
or
intelligence.
Gathering intelligence, yeah. There's nothing they bring back that changes the tactics. They march around one time each day, and then six times, whatever, 7 times on the last day. And then the walls come tumbling down, they all go straight up into the city. So they didn't have to use battering rams, they didn't have to worry about where are the strong and weak points. And that's what we would expect that spies would have done. So anyway, next chapter. Now they come to the Jordan. They're still on the east side of the Jordan at this point, just north of the Dead Sea. And now they are going to get all lined up. And one of the things that is the story, almost all the way through Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, is the story of the ark. Okay, where is that? Where is the covenant box? And it's going to go all the way almost to the end when it gets taken by the Babylonians, and it's just never heard from after that. So the ark, symbolic of God's presence, is going to be through there. Another thing is going to be this is about who's the leader. Who's really leading this? Is God leading it? Judges is going to say individual human beings were appointed by God from time to time to lead. Finally, Samuel is going to say we move into kingship, though there's always a counterbalance of kingship isn't working very well, and we're going to see the southern kingdom says the kings finally blew it, and they went after other gods and they lost everything. So if God is God, everything will go well. As soon as you start saying we're going to do new and improved, it's always worse. And thus this is the story about how for virtually 600 years they turned away from God. And here are the highlights of the story about how they turned away from God. The beginning, of course, how it all went well. And so chapter 3, verse 7, the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they may know that I will be with you as I was with Moses. You are the one who shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant. When you come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. And then the people with the ark are going to go into the Jordan, and then the water is going to stop, and they are going to go through on dry ground." Sounds like
Red Sea.
The
Red Sea, by the Sea of Reeds, where the water all parted and they went through on dry ground. So this second generation is going to have that same experience as the first generation did. It's not going to be wind blowing, and Adam, which is where the water stops, it's somewhere around about 18 miles, whatever 18 miles north would be, that there's kind of an earthquake kind of a thing here. The last time I read that they had an earthquake that stopped up the Jordan altogether was about 1930. If it's happened since then, I don't know, but so every once in a while, some of the hill or the side of the river comes down and blocks it up for a little while until the water can start washing it through again. But they all go over on dry ground, and this very symbolically that God is opening the way to them. I've mentioned this in the story about Jesus' baptism, that it's almost as if there's some sense that the gospel writers are saying Jesus goes into the Jordan and comes back into the land once again. It's more than just the water, but he's going to come into the land and be faithful and honorable, whereas the other ones weren't. So all of this stuff, all of these stories about the faithlessness of the people of Israel after they came in, Matthew will be the one that jumps out most clearly. We'll say everywhere they were faithless, he was faithful. And so if you know all of this story and you look at Jesus' life, this is what was done to fulfill what had been spoken by the prophets. Yes?
How do you differentiate from the Lord God and just the Lord?
You
Those
don't.
is used throughout this book.
The word Yahweh is used, the word Elohim is used, sometimes the word El is used, sometimes Yahweh Elohim. They just get used interchangeably. And you would not believe how boring it is to keep reading the commentaries about that. Nobody knows.
Okay, so
There are some who have said, the closest that I've seen, and I don't know if I even buy it, but their commentary, Bowling, who did the commentary on Joshua and Judges, says that the word El or Elohim for God is used more about the majesty and the might of God, whereas Yahweh is used more about the caring and the mercy of God. But I'm not, I haven't been able to test that one out yet. But certainly they get used interchangeably all over,
Okay.
all over.
And Jesus is not in the picture.
No, I don't believe he is. Not until the New Testament. There are people who will say, well, anytime that the angel of God appears or something like that, that's Jesus in the Old Testament. I see no evidence for it, and I think it's overstating it and adding to something. I know there are people even in the Missouri Synod who would disagree with me when I say that, but I don't see anything about Jesus until it says, you shall name him Jesus. And so beyond that, I think we simply need to say God worked in a variety of ways in the Old Testament and not try to push it into the pre-existent Christ or something like that. I'm very uncomfortable with adding that to the text. I don't think we need it. God is there, to try and define which person of the Trinity or something like that, I think is more than the words say. So I'm willing to just let be what's there. And some people, they want to micromanage every single little bit of the story. And I'm just uncomfortable with that. Okay? Yes?
God went before the Israelites as they traveled in a cloud or a pillar of fire. So at what point did he not? Was it once they got into the promised land?
You don't find the pillar in the promised land.
Okay.
You will find him talk about the Lord of armies and the head of the armies of God, which comes in here, that talks about the head soldier who goes in to work on the victory along with the people who are here. But you don't find anything about the cloud. You'll see little bits of it that we'll see in the prophets like Ezekiel, and like the vision that Isaiah sees in Isaiah 6, where you'll see some of these kinds of things. But that's for guidance to get there. Once they get there, the only time I remember the cloud is at the dedication of the temple, where there will be a cloud that hovers over Solomon's temple, and it will be there. But other than that, it's not regularly appearing. But usually that comes when it says God draws near, and he uses the cloud to hide his own present appearance. It doesn't mean he's not there, but they'll see it in different ways. Okay?
Yeah, that was all set around the tabernacle, I believe, the cloud. I think I just read about that. And then when they left, the cloud had, yeah.
Yeah, and once they get in the land of promise, the tabernacle almost disappears. And there's very little about it. We'll see that, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we get there as we need to.
Was that with the covenant, the ark then, or?
Well, the ark and the tabernacle
They
doesn't
went
seem to
hand
get
in hand,
mentioned.
didn't they?
Yeah, but they don't seem to mention the tabernacle
Oh.
much. They'll talk about Shiloh and Bethel and other places where the ark was, but they don't necessarily talk about the whole tabernacle at that point. But let's save that for when we get to
Yeah, thank you, sorry.
Joshua comes to the Jordan. He says, keep back a distance from the ark, 2,000 cubits, about a third of a mile. For some reason, when the Jews came up with an idea about how far it was okay to walk on the Sabbath day before you were working, it was this distance. So they could go 2,000 cubits, or cubits about 18 inches roughly, so 1,300 feet or something like that. Is that 1,300 feet, Jim? 2,000 cubits? No, 2,000 cubits would be 2,000 times 18 inches. So it'd be about 3,000 feet, about a half a mile, I guess it would be, about a half a mile. But that's much, much later. So they recognize then that they're going into the land. They're certainly getting a sign here. If they want something to know something special is going on, they're getting a sign. The trouble is people forget their signs very quickly, and they keep wanting new signs. Chapter 4 then, and by the way, it was even during harvest time, when the water be at its highest, that water stops up. So chapter 4, we have 12 men, one from each tribe, and the children are to ask about those. What mean these stones? This reminds us of the place where God was. It gets a bit confusing because you have a reference to the stones up on the hill on the side, and you have a pile of stones in the middle. I can't solve that one for you. I don't know if there were two of them, or if there was a pile of stones that was by the side, but when the waters were higher, then it flooded and was not seen. But it apparently is something where they would at least see from time to time where this was, where they crossed. I have seen the Jordan in April and in August. I remember it most clearly in August. It was not much wider than from here to right here. Okay, it was just barely, hardly any water in August. when they didn't have rain. And so it's not like you have the Mississippi all the way through. Just like the Mississippi up here is not as wide as it is, when you get farther south. It'll look much farther across, when you get farther south. But the people come, the priests come, and they enter by a city that they call Gilgal. This is where they are going to do the circumcision once again. In chapter 5, we hear that the Amorite and the Canaanite kings are disheartened. The Amuru are what are called the Westerners. It's the people who would have come out of Iraq back already about the time of Abraham and moved into that entire region that you have here and farther north and all around it, Syria and Turkey and Lebanon and down into Israel. So Abraham is part of a much wider migration that's going on. And now, when they're coming in here, those who had migrated there many centuries before, which are the ones who have now fulfilled their sinning, that God has finally said, enough. And you all know that it's hard to know at what time you say enough. If somebody is monkeying around in a classroom, at what point do you finally say, that's it, I've had it? And there may be days when you go longer, maybe days when you say, no, out of here right now. So the same thing here, we don't know why, at what point God would do this, but what triggered it, remember, is that the Egyptians were oppressing the Israelites. As long as they were leaving them alone in Goshen, everything's okay. So it's when the Egyptians were making them slaves and they came out, that's when finally it's time for them to go into this land. And so they have not done circumcisions according to the text during the time they were in the wilderness. And so they do that first of all. They keep the Passover there. And now the manna stops. All of a sudden, this manna that they've been getting for all these years. So that's the first chunk, 1 to 5, as they're preparing to enter the land and just getting inside the Jordan. Then we're going to talk about how they take the middle part of the country. So this section here, what later will be primarily Ephraim and Manasseh and a little bit of Benjamin. Not all of the tribes are given equal time. Okay, so you'll hear a lot more about Judah, a lot more about Ephraim and Manasseh. Well, Judah as the major tribe. Reuben is going to stay across the Jordan over here. Simeon is going to be within the tribe of Judah, not even really have its own land by the time it's all done. All said and done. Levi is going to be the worshiping tribe that leads in worship and teaching the law, and they will be scattered throughout the country. And so Judah, which is going to run the southern third of the country, they're the major one there. That's the head, really the most important of the Leah tribes. Dan and Ephraim and Manasseh, the two children of Joseph, not Dan, Benjamin. So Benjamin and Joseph are going to have the whole middle part of the country. Okay, Ephraim and Manasseh on both sides of the Jordan, they're going to be the ones. I didn't realize that this light could make that thing move. I will figure that out at some point. But, so anyway, the chapters 6, 7, 8 are going to talk about what happens in the center part of the country. Then people here aren't going to like that they came in, and then we'll have a couple chapters about what happens in the south, then in the north, and then you have this whole long section that I'm sure just really got you excited to read about all those cities and all those valleys and all those place names. Okay, and it doesn't mean much for you, but do any of you own property? Yeah, maybe just a teeny little piece, but you know how it says on the property that you own exactly where it's located? You know, on the plat book. That's important. That's important. Somebody says, okay, that's what you have paid for and what you get to use right now. All right, so if you remember one of these tribes and you saw your land there and that God had given you that land, what for us is terribly boring, for them would have been very, very important. And this is ours. God gave us this. Trouble is we don't know we know very little about what the people actually thought, what was going on in most of the people's minds. We get God gave it, and we get a lot about the people who resisted. But the common, ordinary guy who was sitting under his vine and fig tree, we have almost nothing in the Bible about that. About how were they doing? You'll get it once in a great while, but only kind of very generic kind of a statement. But anyway, chapter 6, they are going to get ready to go up into the land. And so the people of Jericho knew that there was going to be trouble. So, first of all, Joshua says, you're going to march around the city, all the warriors circling the city once for 6 days, and then the 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, the priests blowing the trumpets. And then when you make this long blast with the ram's horn, everybody is going to shout, and the walls will come tumbling down. So, how come the walls came tumbling down? I had a classmate who said, in a Bible class he taught once, the people said it was because everyone was stomping so much that they shook the walls loose.
Did he believe that? Believe that?
The person did, my friend didn't, but he said that, everybody stomped enough and that's what made them fall down.
Wasn't it an earthquake?
God somehow shook it. God somehow shook it, yeah. And there are earthquakes all along in that region. This is an earthquake fault that goes all the way down into eastern Africa, the major rift. And Dale could tell you much more about that than I will ever even be able to mumble about tectonic plates and things like that. But the land here is kind of high here. At one point it would have been flat, it got squished. And that's why this is the lowest part on Earth then, and this is the lowest place on Earth because it got squished, and then some of that opened up, and that's where the water that goes into the Dead Sea never comes out. It'll evaporate, but it never comes out. So if you want to do mining, it is a great place to do mining. And so what they do is they pump the water from here into these, which are now known as salt pans. They let the water evaporate, and then they take all the salts and all the minerals and everything, and so that's washing from all over the place that washes down into there, so it can be very rich for that. So anyway, Jericho is set under the ban. This means it's dedicated or given over to God. Nothing is to be for their own use. First of all, the things of God, the worship place and all that is to be provided for, right? And so later they're going to be able to take what they want. We call that spoils of war. And remember how the Israelites despoiled the Egyptians? Well, the Egyptians just said, here, take it all, just take it, be gone. We're so afraid of what you're going to do here. Well, God says, in essence, this is kind of a test. I'm going to find out, are you willing to give me the best? First fruits? Or are you going to keep those for yourself? Are you going to sneak away with whatever you can? Or are you going to give those to me, and then I get the benefit of that first? So they go into the land, and of course, the spies save Rahab and her family. Everybody knew about that. And we're even told that the person who tries to rebuild Jericho will lose family members because of it. Later we'll see where there's a man who loses both his oldest son and his youngest son in the process. Yes?
Chapter 5, verse 13. Who was the man?
Yes. No one knows. He says, I am the head of the armies of the living God. Now, that's what most people would call an angel, except has no wings. What does Joshua do? He says, yeah, sure, right? What does he do?
Yeah.
He bows down and worships him. He acknowledges, I'm under you. I'm sorry I didn't mention that before. It's a very, very good transitional part of it. But in essence, this says, you're not in this alone, Joshua. But in the Old Testament, and in many places in the New, what we think of as angels look like human beings. We saw it in the Sodom and Gomorrah story with the people who come to Abraham, and from time to time, who wrestles with God, or with Jacob. And it's a very puzzling text for everybody all the way through. Moses almost dies, something about with circumcision of his son, and we don't know what that's all about. And there are some texts that are just really hard. But Joshua doesn't have any compulsion, any fear at all of bowing down and saying, I worship you. I acknowledge you're the one who's leading this for me. We call that the Lord of armies, Lord God of Tsebaot, which doesn't mean the Sabbath day. Tsebaot is the word for an army in battle. And so he says, we're here too.
Could we assume that it would mean God manifested?
God works sometimes through actual prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Samuel. Sometimes he works through people who are not identified.
Okay.
And so we call those theophanies or epiphanies at various times. And in our Bible study a few weeks ago on Saturday morning, we're trying to think just how many different situations are there where such figures are depicted. I'm going to be so bold as to say God didn't want us to know any more than this. So it's good enough for him to say someone who looked to Joshua like a human being was being used by God to head up the taking of the land.
Okay,
And Joshua knew it. And that's good enough.
thank you.
Inquiring minds want to know. If we had the National Enquirer's version of the Bible, it would be a lot different. We all ask about this, and there will be 2 different times when we will see someone come and talk, like someone will come and talk to Samuel that way as well, or to Saul. And so we're going to look at some of those, but if they're not further identified, God says it's good enough for me just to let you know someone was acting on my behalf there.
Okay.
But without all the wings and flying around and all that kind of stuff. Yes?
Do you think that God sends messengers today?
I don't think God sends messengers today. Not like that. God has spoken to us in former times through the prophets. In the latter days, he spoke to us by his Son. And it may be that people get insights from God, or they're thinking about something and they get an aha moment. But if I want to know about God, I want to read the scriptures, not look out the window and try and make something up.
Oh.
Okay? And so I want to be very hesitant to think, well, God sent somebody to me last night and spoke to me. I very, very, very rarely watch anything like the 700 Club. But I can remember one time where somebody was there and the Lord laid a burden on me last night, and God spoke to me, and I just find those things very dangerous because I interpret them. That's why even if something bad happens to us, we start figuring out what's God trying to say. We're in really dangerous territory. The closest he's trying to say is, I still love you and I'm going with you, and don't think that I'm hurting you or trying to push you away. We have to be very careful that we don't jump at what our old nature inclination would be, which is I want to know more. You say, no, he's with me, but he doesn't have me looking inward at myself. He has me looking outward at the mission that he has for me, for loving people. He's not interested in me figuring myself out. He's interested in me in saying, well, he died and rose for me, that's what's true, so I go on from here. Okay. So anyway, chapter 7 then, we find that that one guy took something, Achan. He stole. And so he took some of the spoils, so they don't find that out until they go to a nearby town and some people are killed. How many of the Israelites were killed at Jericho? Nada. We can figure that out because 36 get killed and they're really out of sorts. What's the first thing that they say? God has failed us. And Joshua even goes, well, God, what did you do wrong? Why didn't you keep your promise up? And the Lord says, hey, Joshua, somebody in your crowd did something. They stepped outside. And so one individual can bring troubles on lots of people. And so they identify the Judahite by the name of Achan. He confesses his family must have known it. So he steals some very rich things, buries them in his tent, and they all know about it, and so he's put to death. God says, sometimes I let it go, like Adam, or like Cain, who has a mark put on his head. Sometimes God says, I do something right away. Remember Aaron's older 2 sons, Nadab and Abihu?
Yes.
And they are struck down right away. God says, I don't have to tolerate any of this. I ask you to serve me. And those who want to go away from that, they bring the consequences on the entire relationship. And so at the valley of Achor, which will be referred to even back in Hosea, that the valley of Achor, where there was such sadness, will be a doorway of hope. It reminds me of the Ananias and Sapphira story in Acts, where they lied and said, we brought everything. They didn't have to bring anything. They lied. And so at some points God says, I'm not going to just toy around with you. And right away, what kind of God would just, get angry that quickly? He goes against what God had set in motion. They were going to get all of it later. But I have to have it now. And I have to want it now. And so I often joke that he stole a Paris original. And because that's what it would have been. So he gets this, maybe a gown from the Academy Awards, so I'm not sure how it goes. So anyway, they go back to the city of Ai, and the city of Ai means the city of destruction. The place was all trashed. And so they go back there, they do an ambush by coming around from behind, and the people of Ai are killed. I will belabor this from time to time. There are people who have looked at the word Eleph, which means 1,000 at some points in the Bible, but also means a contingent. And Aleph is the word for a leader or a friend. I have to check this out, but I think the word caliphate comes from the same thing in Arabic. I have to check that, but just where there is a leader in charge of all of this. But they take everything from there then. We don't find that God says, I want it all for me. And then they build an altar, and they're going to redo this thing with the blessings and the curses. So anyway, that's the central part of the land. The southern part of the land, there are kings of the land who go to fight first of all, the Gibeonites, who lied. They lived in the land. They're part of a group called the Hivites, not the Hittites, but the Hivites, a small group in the central hill country here. And they go and they lie and say, we came from a far place, and we came here, we wanted to be with you, and so here we are. And instead of checking with God, they say, yeah, we'll make a treaty with you. And then the 5 major kings of the south find out about that, and Jerusalem and Jarmuth and Eglon and some other ones, and they say, we're going to go attack those people. Well, the result of it is when they find out about that they were people from close at hand, God said, the people from far away, you can make a treaty with them if you want. The people who live close at hand, they're going to pull you away after their gods. Don't make a treaty with any of them. And so Joshua has now gone away from that. It says they will be the hewers of wood and drawers of water. They'll be the servants at the worship site. So Joshua kind of puts a curse on them, but spares them. Then chapter 7, we have Adoni-Zedek from Jerusalem. And then Hebron, Jarmuth, and Lachish, and Eglon, which are the other major cities of the south. And they win battles, and God kills many with hailstones. See, that's the kind of thing where God is giving them at least some initial victories. This is the one where it says the sun stands still at Gibeon, and I'm not even going to get into that right now. There are all sorts of things about whether there was actually that the entire universe stops, or whether the sun just shone during that time period, or how it worked. But they recognized there was a victory that they were given, and they had extra time to win that victory. And then the kings who were in the cave of Makkedah, they bring them out and they put them to death. They say, okay, we're going to stop with you. So that's in the south. Chapter 11 then is up in the north, where Jabin, the king of Hatzor, forms a northern coalition. Here is the battle that's going to take place by the waters of Merom, and what does God do here with them? The chariots.
He tells them how to kill the horses.
Yeah, but the chariots are made ineffectual, and so again here the chariots are to be burned eventually, and so except for the city of Hatzor, many of the cities are destroyed, and that's up over here. Hatzor, I think, would be right about here, like across the Jordan. I think you look, or somewhere right, you can look at just the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee when you are up on the top of the mound at Hatzor. So center, south, and north. We're going to have a different pattern when we get into the book of Judges, where not everything looks so nice and normal. But the people, once again, it says God hardens the hearts of the people, and that they are destroyed. Chapter 12 is kind of a summary chapter, listing all the kings who were destroyed. So we ought to be happy about this, because God kept his promise. Okay? If I look at it from inside the story, there were people who were threatening who did not have their will. Chapters 13 and following say that God promises to drive the rest of them out, and that many peoples had not been driven out yet. They once again talk about that land east of the Jordan, and then they divide up the land to the west, take care of Caleb first of all, because he and Joshua, remember, are the only two who were mature adults who went into the promised land, who had been out in the wilderness when they came out. Then chapter 15, we talk about Judah, the very southern part, and all of what happens there, including Caleb's portion and Othniel, who we'll see again at the beginning of next time. Chapter 16, we have Manasseh and Ephraim, and that the Canaanites have not all been driven out. Then Manasseh, so Judah, Manasseh, Ephraim get a lot of play, and then they're told, clear the mountains of the trees if you want a little bit more land. But then, chapter 18, you still have 7 tribes. They meet at Shiloh, they draw straws. And then this long list of all the different geographical things. There are people, archaeologists, who have gone through from already 200 years ago. And they've gone through the whole country, and they've tried to identify every single place. Sometimes they can do that by finding out the names of little towns and villages today. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But much of the work that archaeologists will do is to say, do we find a destruction layer at the time when we believe we should find one? So Benjamin gets a little bit more detail listed. Then Simeon is settled within. Then we have Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan's territories. Dan later is going to move to the north. He's going to start right by the Philistine territory and then move way to the far northern part of the country. Joshua is given his land in the area of territory of Ephraim. Then we have cities of refuge. Kadesh, Shechem, Kiriath Arbab, Bezer, Ramoth Gilead, and Golan, and Bashan. There you get your Golan at this point. So those cities, if you had an accident and you hurt somebody and they died, you would run to one of those cities and you would stay there and be judged there. Even if you were innocent, you would have to stay there until the high priest died. Because there would still be some sin of yours that the high priest, when he dies, all of the sins committed on his watch die with him. So pray that you don't have a young high priest if you have to run to one of the cities of refuge.
Is that if you're found guilty, though?
I'm sorry?
Is that if you're found guilty?
No, if you're innocent. If you're guilty, they'd still put you to death. So if you really were gunning for your friend, you'd still be put to death. But you'd at least have a chance for a hearing. Otherwise, if the family would find you innocent or guilty, they could put you to death on the way. So this is only for the people who, they didn't do it on purpose. So someone, they're chopping away on a tree and an axe head flies off and hits somebody else and kills them. Well, then they wouldn't, they weren't trying to kill the guy. They weren't trying to make it look like an accident. It just happened. It was an accident. Then somebody died, but you would at least be able to live and then go back home at some point. Chapter 21, then the Levites are given their land. They're scattered among all the different tribes of the country. And then chapter 22, they send the 2.5 tribes across the Jordan. And then because they think they're building an alternate worship site, they gather at Shiloh and they want to go and attack the 2.5 tribes. Finally, Phinehas is satisfied that they really were not trying to worship another god, but just have an altar of remembrance. Chapter 23, Joshua gathers all of the people together and calls them to be faithful, not to intermarry with others, because that would be they would be snared or trapped by them. And do not let the Lord's anger be kindled, or the Lord's wrath, which means don't reject his love and mercy to try and come up with something else. So our old sinful nature always wants more. But to say the Lord has given me plenty, the Lord has blessed me, and helped me to live with that. Then the last chapter, chapter 24, very interesting in that it says that Abram and his family served other gods. My guess is that it was the moon god that he and his family worshipped. So God did not choose Abraham because he was faithful like Noah. He chose him and graced him And Abram responds by believing the offer of God's grace, and that's what's reckoned or counted to him as righteousness. So the grace comes first, and then the faith. So if you say to somebody, well, you've got to believe. You just got to believe in God. Don't tell people what they have to do. Say, this is what God has done for you. He has graced you in sending his son to suffer and die to give you complete peace with him forever. And the response to the grace is faith. So when someone says, I've decided to follow Jesus, they're already talking about a response. By that point, God has settled their heart to believe that he's the Savior. And so this one even is, at the very end of it, he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Over at the Sibley house, over along the river, that's over the fireplace. So lots and lots of people have said, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Doesn't matter what anybody else wants to do. So then we get a couple of burials at the end of it. That's it for the day. Thank you. Come again. Bring your friends.